Thanks very much. Ranking Member Braun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schildhorn, how did the story end with Barry Goldstein? I see where he actually got mad at you at the tail end. Was anybody ever able to track this guy down, or is he still out there?
Ranking Member Braun, it ended when I asked him for his Social Security
See
number.
that? Yeah.
And he told me, he actually cursed me out, told me I didn't love my son, and stopped communicating with me at that point. So that's how it ended. What was the second part of your question?
So, in other words, he got frustrated, and then he just disappeared into the ether then?
He recognized that. But is he still out there? Yes. And I know that because the calls I got when people found my article were telling me that it was Mr. Goldstein.
So he's still using the same name?
It works. Why not? And when the reporter reached out to him, it was pretty incredible because the reporter said, "You're in California. How did you meet with Brett Schildhorn in Philadelphia?" "Oh, well, it was a phone meeting." I mean, he had answers for everything. But yes, as far as I know, from the calls I've received, that scam is unabated. It still goes on. And no one has...
And the traceability of using a phone or whatever he does has never led authorities to Mr. Goldstein.
When I first contacted the FBI, they said, well, they use burner phones, which cannot be traced, and the cryptocurrency cannot be recalled. And at that time, I'm not even sure they could find the accounts that cryptocurrency went on. This was 2020. So law enforcement had no solution. As I said in my testimony, it's fundamental in our system that if you're harmed, you have a remedy. And here, there seemed to be no remedy, neither the courts of law or law enforcement.
And he's not the only one. Thank you for
Sure.
explaining that thoroughly. Question for Mr. Romanoff. When you look at how AI has been used in terms of credit card companies, healthcare, we know, and we've seen some real graphic examples of how it's used maliciously. Can you go over a few of the things that we know it's worked at and saved time and money?
Yeah, so the sheer amount of information and data that needs to be processed in order to protect systems against cyber crime and hacking is a human can't do it. And so there's algorithms that have existed for many years now. AI has been used to assist cyber defenders for years in terms of processing that information, identifying trends, and flagging anything that could be fraudulent in that space. That continues to be a major factor in terms of defending against some of these attacks. And in terms of some of the expended capacity of being able to detect whether a phone call is actually coming from the right person or identifying trends in robocalling and things like that, AI can be very useful in assisting in that, which does tend to stem some of the scams that are being perpetuated. In terms of direct correlation between what the credit card companies and this application, there are some obstacles there. You have to have the credit card company or a financial institution involved in order to identify a fraud or scam. And so when it's happening at an individual level, there is some question as to who steps in and uses these powerful systems to identify that.
So in your opinion then, for the bill that we're introducing, I think I'm going to get co-leads on the other side of the aisle, the Medicare Transaction Fraud Prevention Act, which is aimed at diagnostic testing and durable medical equipment. Is there any reason the principles of what you just described wouldn't work to prevent fraud there, through CMS?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that there's different data regulations in terms of HIPAA versus consumer data and protections on that front. I would have to read the bill in order to provide specific insights on that. But in terms of the systems of AI being used to identify fraud, you can see an application there in the application of healthcare in general. Yes.
That amount, by the way, is $60 billion a year,
Oh, yeah.
defrauding Medicare. It's a lot. I got another question. Do you want to yield back?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. This is for Dr. Ecken. We just described what's happening in our own government, and like when we did the extended unemployment benefits, which was just under $1 trillion, and there's an estimate that anywhere from 100 to 200 billion from domestic and foreign fraudsters. And when the government's involved, it's like, it's a lot easier, seemingly, to defraud. I've never heard commercial entities, they've got all this protective gear. Here, it's like picking it out of a toddler's hand almost. So what can we do here, and let's just look at CMS's current Medicare fraud prevention system, compare it to what could be out there, and is it any different from what it was years ago?
Thank you, Senator Braun, for the question. There have been many improvements. Actually, in 2011, since 2011, now CMS has authority to use predictive algorithms to identify fraud. And they have come up with this fraud prevention system. And now we have the second installment of that. And over time, they have been using some both prepayment and post-payment methods to detect fraud. But most of the focus has been on post-payment, which basically focuses on more pay and chase transactions. So the basically system pays the providers, including fraudsters, and then try to chase the potential the funds from the fraudulent transactions, which we are not as successful. We are not able to recover as much. So recently, with the second installment of the fraud prevention system, they also added prepayment edits, but they mostly focus on eligibility of billings with respect to the policies and rules of Medicare.
So is the amount of $60 billion a year going down, or is it still going up?
I believe it's still going up because our also annual healthcare expenditures have been going up, right? Especially last decade. So most of the government agencies put the overall loss around 3 to 10%. Given that we are spending more than $4 trillion on healthcare, the amount is easily in dozens of billions.
That's all in the context currently. We're borrowing $1 trillion every 6 months to run this business here. And when you've got that kind of fraud nipping at its flanks, something's got to give. Yield back.